For the remainder of the slides, I just want to walk you through the toolbox and tell you about the items that are contained within. So in the toolbox, our first section is known as simple containers. Simple containers are layout nodes, which are a rectangular area of space in which you can add your child objects. Now, when you put a layout node, we're going to attempt to render it on one page. If there's not enough space, we'll go ahead and start a new page. Now, whether you select a horizontal box or a vertical box is how you intend for the children to be added. If you want your items added from the left to right, you would place out a horizontal box. If you wanted them added from top to bottom, you would place out a vertical box. The next section to talk about is propagating containers. Now with simple containers, we said once it was full, if it takes up more than a page, it's just going to continue on to the next page. Propagating containers do a similar thing. It tries to force the contents to be drawn on one page where it's possible, but if there's insufficient space, it's going to replicate itself on the next page, but include the headers and footers that are defined for each page. Now if you place out a horizontal box, the default is for the children to be added left to right, and it's going to be placed out there with a minimum size in both directions. If you put out a vertical box, the children by default are going to be top to bottom, but again it's going to have a minimum size in both directions. If you put out a page route, which you'll notice regardless of whether we put out an empty report or whether we put out a template report, we always had the page route at the top. It's going to be the top object in the structure, and its size is going to be max in both directions, meaning take up the maximum width of the page size, take up the maximum top to bottom of the page size. And finally, we have this concept of a stripe, and the stripe, when put on, the layout direction, whether is going to be max, while the size in the other direction is going to be min. And this is the parent object that we use for objects that we're going to relatively position, such as the columns of a row being sent across to a report. And a stripe propagates onto a new line when the previous line is filled. You'll notice all of these are called a mini page, and when they're brought across into the report structure, they're also going to say mini page. And we can look at the icon to see what type of mini page it was as a default. So once you have your containers on a page, it's then time to put in what we call drawables, or to put in business graphs, or to put in references, or to put in barcodes. We're going to start by looking at the section drawables. Now, the drawables, we have 5 items in there. The first being a word box. This is equivalent to an edit in the form. The text is not going to wrap into a new line if it's insufficient space. You're giving us a box area where we can put text into it. This is versus a word wrap box, which is equivalent to a text edit in forms, and it's used to wrap text onto the next line if there's insufficient width. This, we're normally going to leave the Y attribute blank so that the object can grow as text wraps around so that all the text fits in. There's some properties associated with these. The text tells us what value to display. The trim text tells us whether to remove spaces from the left side, from the right side, from both sides, or whether to compress the text. The text alignment, do we want it left aligned or right aligned or centered? And then if you're doing localization, you can check the localized text, and it will then localize according to the files you provide. If you place out a decimal format box, the decimal format box is used for numbers. You're going to have a format option. The formatting is the same as the 4GL format string. So a pound sign will display blank if 0, an ampersand will display 0 if 0, a minus sign displays a minus sign, and a dollar sign displays currency. The value must be a number, so whatever expression you have inside the value needs to interpret as a number. A few more drawables that are inside of that toolbox. We have a page number. That's, of course, going to put out the page number. We have an image box, and that's where you can go and specify the path to an image to include in your report. There's a series of business graphs that you can drag and drop onto a report. We have a special module that talks explicitly about working with charts and graphs. We have reference nodes that you can add. We're going to talk more about the reference box and the info node when we go into the module on page headers and page footers. And if you're working with barcodes, there's a selection of barcodes that are covered here. Alternatively, once you place a barcode on a report, you can go and select additional barcodes beyond the most common ones that we've placed up here. And we further talk about barcodes in the module 15. The best thing for you to do now is take a time now to stop and either play with Report Designer or watch the video on the lab exercise designed for Module 4. If you have a lab exercise printed out and you have the ability to get on a system and work with Report Designer, hands-on is the best way to better understand how Report Designer works. If you don't have access to Report Designer or you don't have the lab exercise, go ahead and watch the video we've created showing the lab exercise so you can understand better how to build a report from start to end.